On Thanksgiving, my son raised his glass and said, "To the woman who gave us this house, my wife's mother." I stayed silent. The next morning, I took back the $17.50 M estate and left them a note. I heard his voice first, a syrupy, forced warmth laden with theatrical patronizing. "To the woman who gave us this house, my wife's mother." The words coiled in the air like a snake, sweet on the surface, venom beneath. He turned toward me with the faintest crook of eyes narrowing. "What are you staring at me for?" he snarled, voice dripping with disbelief. "A parasite clinging to my family, feeding on our scraps, not someone worth remembering." The words, sharp and slick, sliced through the awkward silence of the Thanksgiving dinner, carving a scar in my chest. I sat there at the table, surrounded by mashed potatoes and turkey gravy, steel gray counters flecked in candlelight, a mismatch of plastic and porcelain plates. I felt invisible, like a shadow at the edge of a photograph, drifting with substance but absent of acknowledgement. Wine glasses shimmered and clinked, children laughed softly, oblivious to the venom in the air. Forks tapped against plates, forks that once learned to lap up mashed potatoes from my hand, but now ignored me. Their laughter ricocheted off walls that had known more joy in lost birthdays than this hollow performance. I watched the little digital window on their phones, the live stream feed. Faces floated on screens, vibrant and unsuspecting. Captions scrolled in real time, sarcastic hearts and laughing emojis mocking me. It felt like a haunting, an echo of a soul on the brink of being erased. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. My palms were hot, my knees trembled like a whisper. I lifted the teacup carefully, sipping slowly. The tea was bitter, grounding me with its heat, its permanence. It reminded me that I still exist, that my heart still pulses, that I am not ash. I leaned back into my chair. The room smelled of roasted turkey, cranberry sauce simmer, and regret heating in the air. I remembered why I still sat here. I remembered nights long ago when Evan faced an avalanche of debts, his promises shredded by reckless cards and cruel casinos. I remembered the phone call, 2 a.m., raining, and my nerves firing. I had reached into savings I had set aside after decades of living modestly, and I rescued him. I remembered the textbooks I bought when his student loan evaporated, the night I said, "You will be a nurse, not a bartender handing out regrets." They called me Charon, ferryman of debts and sins. I carried them across their own failures, and they called me a lifeboat that grounded their progress. Now, I sat at a banquet. They treated me like garbage. No one said grace. No one whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving." Instead, they broadcasted my erasure on screens, hearts floating, comments chiming in like droplet echoes. I let every morsel sink. I let every look, every shared laugh, every vibration of a thumbs up ricochet into the sorrow I didn't show. I clenched the teacup, white-knuckled. My pulse thundered, slow, deliberate, and I sat still. I did not cry. I was a calm tidal wave. The tremor in my voice calmed as the tea dissolved that tremor. Memories drifted upward and I caught them, reminders of a time when dinner tables held gratitude, not faux sentiment. I swallowed again. The tea tasted of charcoal, but it grounded me. They think they can expel me, move me off to assisted living, swap the name on the deed, let me fade. But my pulse says otherwise. I gathered memory into a tight fist inside me. Decades of kindness, patience, humility, culled down to silent steel. I folded them, compressing because they will be my leverage, my edge. The world outside turned white, snow gathering like silent accusation. Winter crept its fingers across the window, pale and knowing. Inside, I was still. They passed plates, collected second spoons, chuckled at something someone on the live stream said. I remained a living statue, heard but not heard. When will they forget there is a person here? Or maybe they are waiting for me to disappear without a whisper. But I will not. I will learn the measure of my own strength in this moment, where laughter echoes and I remain silent. Their laughter, hollow as it was, anchors me to this moment in time. It fuels the fire of clarity. I will remember. I will survive. I will be seen again, on my terms. I took another sip of tea. Warmth spread through my chest. The night outside grew colder, but inside something thawed. resolve. I belonged here, not as guest or ghost, but as rightful owner of both memory and dignity, and when this night ends, I will walk out of here again, not erased, not silenced, but carved into the story they tried to bury. And then, behind the laughter and dishes, I will begin the work of being truly visible again. I heard her voice in the corridor before I could drift fully to sleep. It was clipped and low, like a scalpel slicing through the quiet. If she only signs these papers, we can quietly move her into the care wing by Monday. Daphne's voice was disturbingly calm, as if discussing a shipment rather than a human being, clinical in its cruelty. Evan nodded beside her, twirling a cheap pen between anxious fingers. "Think of it as decluttering," he added with unnatural equanimity. "She is old. She is obsolete. We should do this cleanly." The words slithered into my heart like ice water, turning warmth into numb ache. I lay still, pressing my face into my pillow, as if the fabric could absorb the betrayal. The house was cold, the lights low. I wrapped myself tighter in soft flannel, 3 layers, but none of them could shield me from feeling colder than any winter night I have ever known. Yet beneath the cold, something ignited in that fragile chest. I am still here. Pretending to be asleep, I heard the soft click of footsteps retreating. They thought I was gone, suffocated, erased. But I was still here, so I let them go, and with the faintest strength I possessed, I rose quietly, naked feet touching cold floorboards that carried echoes of childhood laughter. Months ago, in one of Daphne's frustrated outbursts, she had flung a tarnished silver locket at me, a tacky, mass-produced chain with a dull pendant they considered worthless. She said it was mine, if I would stop, holding everyone back with my old-fashioned thrift and reluctance to sell the family home. It was a gift in disdain, a gesture of irritation that clipped with contempt. I held it in my trembling palms now. The chain was bent, the leaded glass felt cold, and I knew this would be my shield. With gentle precision, I placed a tiny digital recorder inside, wedging it into the hollowed interior. I purged the battery and slipped in a fresh one. Now it was a sentinel cradled near my chest, marking every word, every plan. The next morning, pale dawn filtered through curtains. At the breakfast table, they passed me a cup. Inside were pills, colorless, tasteless sedatives they believed I would swallow without question. They had prepared them for me, with practiced care, like offering warm milk to a crying child. I lifted the cup, water cool around my fingertips. I let the pill touch my tongue, then I spat it into the napkin. I offered them a soft smile. I betrayed nothing. Their care was a veneer. They believed they would witness me fall asleep that afternoon. But they did not know. Each pill became a stone I could hurl into the murky pond of their expectations. That night, snow fell in silence, speckling the world in white. I lay in my old rocking chair by the window, the recorder in my lap. I pressed play. Daphne's voice echoed. "She signs, we move her. Someone will call it a fall." Then Evan, flat and measured. "No autopsy, proper paperwork, no mess." Their voices, clinical and terrifying, floated in amber. I listened, and still. They thought they had scripted my end. I heard only their own undoing. I let the recording end, and I sat in silence. My breath arranged itself, slow and steady. The house hummed with private sounds. The heater kicked on. Floorboards creaked in the old way, and the grandfather clock in the hall ticked like a subtle heartbeat. I pressed record again and spoke softly, voice low as distant music. "You will undo me in law. In your mouths, I will become your shame." Then I placed the locket around my neck, nestled near the still chambers of my heart. Even if I rested, it would listen. Outside, snow laid down in quiet absolution. Inside, I schemed. I would return, not as ghost, but as reckoning. I closed my eyes and listened to the deep hum, the steady tick, the memory of birdsong in spring. I drifted off into a different surrender, one of preparation. Over the next days, I moved through routines. I wrote grocery lists, balanced small bills. I walked to my study, where I kept my blog drafts and old poems, and began sketching thoughts, each line a subtle revolt. I will not vanish. They made a plan born of fear. Tomorrow will not come on their terms. I tested the locket's recording regularly. Moments of quiescence lit by memory of that betrayal gave clarity. At night, I traced the pendant against my chest, remembering the sharpness of Daphne's words. I survived that moment, and now survival meant chapters of retaliation. Not in loud headlines, but in quiet justice. I started documenting everything else: subtle dismissals, gaslit concern, moments children looked through me. Each became proof. I transcribed my journal entries precisely, imaging them as future testimony. I scrawled defense strategies and laws. Montana's vulnerable adult statutes forbade exploitation of elders, with up to 10 years in prison. That knowledge became comfort. It was strength bore in statute, not rage. I bought a second recorder and placed it in the room they used most, the living room, where they plotted and laughed. I carried tea over between acts of poised boredom, hiding the device in shadows of floral pillows. When I sat, I would note their laughter, their words, declutter, old, fast, clean, each utterance a confession captured in amber. Night after night, I reviewed recordings, cross-checked with statutes. They were evidences, patterns of coercion. Their voices diffused my fear. I calibrated each file, labeled them with date and time. I compiled folders, silently. On the evening of the first snowfall after Thanksgiving, I composed an email. I attached my recorded files, a typed affidavit of me under oath, and my lawyer's contact. I wrote, "I am still here. The truth surpasses fear. Here are actions to align with consequences." I sent to state attorney, to a trusted journalist, and to a law firm specializing in elder justice. I did not ask for sympathy. I submitted evidence. That night I sat and sipped cocoa. Snow fell thick. The recording devices lay silent but not forgotten. I had pressed play on justice. They do not know I survived because I refused to die quietly. The next morning I rose before dawn. The world outside was coated in a thin layer of frost, the first tentative breath of winter. In the dim light, I seated myself at the kitchen table, my heart steady but resolute. I opened my laptop, hands firm on the trackpad, and began composing the most important email of my life. Attachments: 2 audio files, from the locket and from the night before. First recording, Daphne whispering, "Just sign, and we remove her next week. No one will question it." Second recording, Evan murmuring, "This falls under elder decline, not violence. Keep it tidy." I added a third file, my own voice, clear and calm, saying, "You will undo me in law, not life. The truth is remembered." Then I addressed the email to my lawyer, to an investigative journalist I trusted, and to the county prosecutor's office. I hit send and exhaled, the pressure in my chest loosening as if I'd released a burden. The morning was quiet, new, and full of possibility. In Montana, exploiting a vulnerable adult, especially through undue influence or deceit, is a felony punishable by up to $10,000, 0 cents in fines, and up to 10 years in prison under Section 456333 of the Montana Code. As a result, Elder Protective Services and county prosecutors are required to investigate such claims when evidence is presented. I walked to the living room in time for them to arrive down the hall, garbed in hypocrisy. They were ready for a breakfast of lies. They were not expecting me. I carried myself in, quietly but with purpose, and announced softly, "I have a statement to share." Their fork paused mid-air. Then I began live streaming directly from my phone, set so it would broadcast across all channels I had activated. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I turned on the camera facing me, winter light soft on my skin, fierceness glinting in my eyes. "My name is Helen Archer," I said. My voice was measured, unwavering. "I am still alive, and I have not forgotten what you said." I clicked play on one of the recordings. Daphne's voice played through the speakers. "Just sign these papers and we'll move you quietly." Evan flinched. The stream went viral within minutes. Comments flooded in. Endorsements, outrage, disbelief that someone could be so malicious toward their own mother. I didn't wait for their reaction on camera. I held their gaze instead. Then I turned off the live stream, set the phone down, and left them in stunned silence. Later, I placed a crisp, lawyer-issued document on the table. The typeface was bold. "All rights to the property located at 142 Evergreen Lane are hereby revoked as of this date. All inheritance claims you believe you have are null and void. I pressed a final note under their eyes. I signed that you once rescued me. Now I'll rescind it. They looked at me, mouths open. Daphne let out an involuntary gasp, and Evan turned pale as if he might faint. I did not move. I simply returned to my seat, brought my hands to the table, and sipped the tea that had gone cold. They slumped in their chairs. Words had turned the table on them. Reality had exposed their intentions. The email was already pinging through inboxes, my lawyer confirming receipt, the reporter replying that she'd publish tomorrow, the prosecutor's office acknowledging that an investigation had been opened. I closed my eyes briefly, letting peace wash in. Outwardly I was calm, composed, a gentle old woman sipping tea. Inside I was lightning, swift, electrifying justice. Outside, the frost sparkled on the window pane. Inside, a reckoning crackled like static. I was not done yet. But today I had spoken, and for the first time in a long time I felt seen. I woke to the sound of notifications pinging like a warning that the world was watching. My live stream from yesterday had gone viral. Comments were pouring in, labels flying like arrows. Someone wrote, "Grandma Survivor." Someone else typed, "Parasite Couple." Those were the cruel monikers used for them. I smiled softly at the juxtaposition. They who treated me like waste were now the ones being labeled as parasites. As for me, I was standing stronger because I had survived them. By midday, email alerts lit up my phone. The county prosecutor's office had acknowledged receipt of my recordings and was launching an investigation into elder abuse. Adult Protective Services were involved, too. My heart calmed with the knowledge that law, not just shame, was on my side. I stood by the window, watching the snow fall like justice returning in silent flakes. Later that afternoon, a reporter from the local news station called, wanting an on-camera interview. She said, "Archer, the public wants to hear your side." I pressed pause before I answered. I would not stand in front of bright lights. I would not lend appearance to the spectacle. I finally replied, "Thank you, but I will not be on camera. The truth is bright enough. It needs no 2-hour slot." They were stunned. That silence echoed longer than any speaking could. Still, the news stations played clips of the vile recordings, Daphne's voice whispering about dosage, Evan's voice calculating how to make me sleep forever. A stunned hush spread among viewers. How could someone treat their mother like a piece of furniture? A wave of petitions began, for reform in elder care protocols, for mandatory reporting of elder exploitation. In the days following, community centers posted flyers, Elder Financial Abuse Awareness Week. Churches held prayer gatherings for elders. I received hand-lettered notes. "Thank you for showing me it is never too late to fight back." Small miracles of acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Daphne and Evan retreated into their rooms like shadows avoiding the dawn. No apologies came. Their mouths opened and closed without sound. They had underestimated the power of being remembered. I walked past the dining room that afternoon, light through the frost painting ghostly shapes on the carpet. They were still there, frozen at the table where they meant to celebrate me, but where they instead celebrated themselves in ignorance. I walked quietly past and out to the porch, letting the cold air coat my cheek. It felt like permission to breathe, to exist, to reclaim. That night I wrote in my journal, "They called me garbage. I remind them that garbage buried will rot, but I have learned to grow from it," and I meant it. I did not need to speak louder. My silence, now matched by community support and legal action, sang. I watched the judge's ruling on television in my quiet kitchen. The speaker, austere and clipped, said, "Ms. Daphne Archer is hereby deprived of custody. A person who regards their mother-in-law as worthless lacks the moral foundation to guide a child." I stared at the screen, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. Justice wearing a judicial robe, not a headline's flash. Within 48 hours, Evan's bank notification came. "Your accounts have been frozen." He attempted to withdraw funds for living expenses, but the bank flagged him. "Unusual activity," they said. His employment collapsed under the weight of scandal. My own money, legally anchored, felt safer than ever in its trust. Daphne and Evan recorded a public apology on live stream that flickered on my tablet. She said sorry, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry for how I treated my mother-in-law." The comment section exploded. "You treated your mother like trash, now live as one." "Hello, Mother? Is that you calling for help now?" Thousands of comments drained the sincerity from her apology until it hung limp on the screen. I didn't look away. Across from me lay a slice of cake I'd scored from a cafe, plain vanilla with "Hello World" iced across its surface. The irony was not lost on me. I cut a bite, tasted sweetness and irony in every crumb. I chewed thoughtfully while the live stream played on. Evan's eyes were red, not from remorse, but from the realization that he had lost far more than legal standing. His dignity, once anchored in inherited wealth, vaporized in public scorn. Daphne pressed the screen as if she could fingernails scratch her way back to favor. But her apology had become a meme of insincerity instead of a bridge to forgiveness. Soon, local community centers and churches hosted discussion groups titled Respect for Seniors. I began receiving invitations, not pleas but open arms offers, to speak and share my experience. I declined each in-person interview, whispering to myself, silence amplified truth. Instead, I continued delivering short blog posts. One evening I published a photo of home-baked bread and a line, "Bread is best when kneaded with care, not taken like owed property." That post went viral among older adults seeking dignity. More private letters came, grandparents thanking me for giving them courage to stand strong. One afternoon, I walked into my study and found a letter from Evan, typed, stiff, addressed simply, "Mother." Inside, he wrote, "I'm sorry. I understand now the weight of words. I fell into the trap you avoided your whole life. No tears drawn, just the crack of acceptance finally escaping lips that once spat contempt." I laid the letter flat on the table beside the Hello World cake. I didn't respond. The letter was his healing. Mine was staying silent, but strong. Outside, the lake mirrored the sky, gray, calm, unbroken. I sipped my tea sitting on the porch and heard children's laughter drifting from the neighbor's yard. I smiled. That laughter once felt out of place to me, too young, like the future forgot me. Now it felt grounded, life continuing unapologetically. I closed my eyes and felt the flame of justice steady inside, not explosive, not loud, but enduring. They had tried to erase me quietly, now I existed loudly in their absence. I did not seek validation, but somehow it found me. Invitations came quietly. An email from a local nursing home's nonprofit asked, "Will you serve as our part-time advisory nutrition consultant for our aging community?" I read the message again. Aging people deserved nourishment not only for body, but for spirit. I accepted. As I closed my laptop, I thought, I will feed people more life than fear. Since the live recordings and legal victory, my blog Second Harvest has become a modest hub for elder strength. I write about vitamin-rich soups to strengthen bones, quiet walks for mental health, how fresh air heals insomnia. Comments trickle in. "Thank you," writes Mrs. Parker, age 92. "Your words remind me I matter." I type back, "You always mattered." Word spread beyond our small town. Local councils invited me to guest write in their newsletters, Words of Quiet Wisdom, to share so simple daily rituals for seniors. They never asked for my photo, just my words. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived. Inside, a shaky script penned by an 87-year-old widow named Agnes. She wrote, "After reading your story, my grandson came home and told me he'd apologized to me for ignoring my advice. He said you gave him courage to see his grandmother as a person, not a relic." I held that line long after tears blurred the ink. Agnes and I exchanged handwritten letters across streets and zip codes. She sent a small framed photograph of granddaughter and grandmother planting tulip bulbs, sunshine blazing like hope behind them. Meanwhile, the phrase, Helen Archer, began to surface online with adjectives that surprised me. Resilient, brave, defender of elders. I never asked for those titles, but I accepted them quietly, like vows sewn into the lining of a coat. At the nursing home advisory meetings, I spoke softly about simple diet tweaks, turmeric-steeped oats for inflammation, pantry essentials to stretch small budgets, ways to preserve dignity while living with chronic illness. Nursing staff took notes. Volunteers passed it door to door. I whispered health into despair. One evening I returned home to find the fridge stocked with fresh produce from a local food bank. Mystery donor, no note. I sipped mint tea, slicing peppers from the gift basket. Gratitude didn't rise as hope, it roared, but I swallowed it in silence. Daphne and Evan remained out of sight. I heard rumors that they'd moved out of state to escape whispers in the community. That was justice's subtle triumph, irrelevance rather than retribution. As the leaves turned and fell, I planted bulbs along the garden path. I planted life, knowing that someday, decades hence, someone would kneel and smile among spring blooms. That was my legacy, quiet, rooting deep. I pressed pen to parchment again, drafting an essay for Second Harvest, Quiet Strength, How Elders Still Shape Us. I ended with, we did not wait to be remembered. We made ourselves unforgettable. This was not revenge. This was reclamation of community, of respect, of purpose. I had retaken what they tried to erase, not with rage but with resolve. And at dawn, when the sky first turned pale gold, I opened my door and walked out barefoot on dew-kissed grass. A new day. I breathed it in. I had become a quiet leader, no loud triumph, just the warmth that radiates from hope planted long before harvest. I could have rested, but rest would mean silence now. They tried to erase me. Instead, I decided to rewrite the narrative. So I founded Elder Echo, a grassroots support collective offering legal guidance, emotional coaching, and nutritional literacy to elders exploited or dismissed by their own families. It was small at first, just me, a retired paralegal, and a former chef who volunteered to teach elder-friendly cooking. But we began with lunch circles in living rooms and dining halls, and word spread. Within months, those who had been silent for decades began to speak. Mrs. Kovach confessed that someone had used her signature to take her house. Mr. Martinez told us how he had been tricked out of his savings. With trembling hands holding a cup of borrowed soup, they spoke, then they wept, then they stood. I witnessed an honesty I could not have predicted, a slow flowering of courage born from shared vulnerability. The laughter and tears echoed, not against walls, but through relationships being rebuilt. Elder Echo became a pulse, a quiet revolution. Then an invitation arrived, for me to be the keynote speaker at the statewide conference entitled Aging with Dignity. Helene Lamont, a senator, wrote me personally. The event was set not on a stage bathed in spotlight, but in a sunlit hall where centenarians and caregivers sat with equal honor. I considered declining too much attention, but I chose to speak anyway, not as a spectacle but as a messenger. At the podium, my voice was quiet but firm. We rebuild a community, not with applause, but with presence. The room erupted in applause, undimmed by ticket fees or cameras, authentic and unyielding. Meanwhile, Daphne and Evan quietly packed and left the state. Their family home went onto the market with "for sale by owner" signs never removed, listing price more embarrassed than desperate. Their names vanished from donor lists, PTA boards, and polite greetings at the grocery checkout. Their absence began to speak louder than any apology ever could. I stayed close to the heart of community I had helped rekindle. I drafted guides for elderly financial autonomy, templates for wills and power of attorney forms. I filmed short videos explaining local resources, how to report exploitation to protective services, where to contact nutrition programs, how to stretch a dollar without sacrificing dignity. I uploaded them to a low-tech community site that older people could navigate in their sleep. The reputation of Elder Echo and my name became associated with something rare, unwavering compassion. I heard phrases like, "That's a Helen Archer solution," from caregivers panicking over bills or legal confusion. I didn't bathe in the praise. I absorbed it like clean air. One morning, I received a letter from a woman whose granddaughter had delivered hot soup and tearful thanks. The granddaughter wrote, "Grandma says you saved her. Thank you." I pressed the paper to my heart, folded it carefully, and tucked it into a book of poetry. At twilight, I walked the community garden we established with donations from neighbors. We planted native grasses, roots reaching down in promise. I paused by a cluster of tulips emerging, their bulbs surviving winter's stillness, promising renewal. I knelt among them, hands in soil, quiet in the knowledge that even darkness serves new life. I never sought to be a hero, but I became one, not in flash, but in footstep after footstep. I mothered stories into survival. I built connection into resistance. I reclaimed dignity, not for me alone, but for anyone whose voice had been quieted. The map of my community was redrawn. Mistrust became solidarity. Indifference became advocacy. Elder Echo became home. And I, once invisible, now exist in every neighbor's quiet reassurance. We remember her, we remember us. I barely heard the knock, soft, uncertain, but something in the air shifted. I was pouring chamomile tea into my favorite porcelain cup, the one with faded blue roses, when I opened the door and saw her, a little girl, maybe 7, curls around her face like questions waiting to be asked. She held a crumpled sheet of paper in one hand and in the other a cloth bag tied with yarn. Her voice was small, but steady. "This is for you, Grandma Helen." I took the drawing first. It was smeared and bright. Stick figures holding hands beneath a tree, one tall with a silver bun, one small with big eyes. The words at the top read, "Thank you for making Grandma well again." My breath caught. My chest didn't ache, it glowed. I invited her in. She nodded, followed me to the kitchen table without hesitation. I poured her a cup of tea, lukewarm and sweetened with a touch of honey. She sipped it like it was the most important thing in the world. I asked, "Are you afraid of getting old someday?" She shook her head, looked me straight in the eye and said, "No, I think getting old like you is really cool." I laughed, a soft sound, more like relief than amusement. "Old isn't scary," I told her. "Being forgotten is." She tilted her head, absorbing the words like sunlight through a window. I pointed to the jars of Nutribiome lining the pantry shelf, each labeled, dated, humming quietly with life. "That helped your grandma," I said. She nodded. "Mom says she smiles now because of the soup you gave us." Her voice didn't shake. Neither did mine. But something invisible between us trembled with meaning. She stayed for 20 minutes. We drank our tea, talked about her favorite color, and whether clouds looked more like animals or pillows. When she left, she hugged me tightly, whispering, "You belong everywhere." I closed the door behind her and leaned against it. I had no photos of awards, no medals on the wall, but that child's voice, her truth, was louder than any spotlight I ever needed. Later that night, I opened my blog. The cursor blinked at the bottom of a nearly finished post. I typed slowly, each word a sigh released. They thought I would die in silence, but silence is not disappearance. It is when I speak in a whisper that makes the world pause. No need for headlines, no need for applause, just this. An old woman, once dismissed, now remembered. I watched the sun fade over the lake. Light danced across the water like a quiet symphony. I held the drawing close and whispered to the night, "You thought I was gone, but I wasn't. I was right here, alive, seen, and unforgettable." Weeks passed, snow reluctantly melting into muddy footprints of early spring. I continued gathering evidence, coordinating with legal authorities, and refining my blog posts, each word a testament to the truth of being forgotten and then remembered. Then a notice arrived. A court hearing was scheduled regarding the fraudulent transfer of the property. The notice bore heavy truth, telling me, "Be present on the 1st of April." I marked the date in my heart. Meanwhile, Daphne and Evan slowly became anyone else, background figures clawing for anonymity. Their hopes faded. Their public veneer withered. The property they believed was secured slipped through their fingers, legally rescinded, revoked, and returned to the trust. On the day before the hearing, I prepared for what would come. I sharpened my words, repainted courage into each step I took. That afternoon, I wrote a short final blog post titled, "The Inevitable Consequence of Forgetting." It ended with, "If you think paying the mortgage makes you the owner, remember, memory is more powerful than title." I did not evaporate quietly. I returned in law, in story, in every truth you spoke in vain. That night, standing by the window, with rain finally washing away the last of winter's frost, I knew the circle was closing. The next morning, the courtroom was still and hushed. The judge's gavel sounded procedural but final. Property title reversed back to the elder trust I had established. The fraudulent transfers declared void. Restitution ordered. Daphne's face collapsed in the front row. Evans slumped, eyes closed. Lawyers whispered, some in sympathy, some in pity. The elder advocacy groups I'd begun working with were recognized in the gallery, familiar faces who once stood behind me, and they now stood with me, power in solidarity. When the hearing ended, I did not speak. I simply walked into the lobby, past the reporter's camera, past the whispers. I carried a small ceramic dish with half of a plum tart, a dessert Daphne used to mock as old-fashioned. I walked into the sunlight and offered it to an elderly woman sitting alone by the door. For you, for the long roads we've traveled. The woman's smile said everything gratitude could. And what of them? I later learned that Daphne, in the weeks that followed, applied to work in another state. She was not hired. Everyone had seen the transcripts, the recordings, the headline, the mother-in-law who fought back. Evan's banking license was suspended for misrepresentation. He applied for a job as a clerk and was turned down. They became known not as affluent heirs, but as cautionary tales. Back home, I re-entered hallways once lined with loneliness. A letter arrived, signed simply E. It said, I cannot promise I'll always remember your name, but today I do. You gave me hope. I held the letter to my chest and let tears come. Not tears of pain, but tears of release. This was not revenge for playback. It was triumph in silence, legacy in action. I placed a green wreath on the door, the wreath of renewal. Then I added a porcelain plaque beside it that read, Here lives a woman who chose remembrance over bitterness. And now, as seasons turn and the old house stands sturdy on the corner of Maple and Elm, stories are told of Helen Archer, the woman they thought would vanish. The way she took back her legacy, not by force, but by proof, by patience, by making silence complete, only to speak when they weren't listening and be heard. So when the wind rustles through the leaves and sunlight catches on her wreath, she knows being forgotten was never the end. It was the setup for her greatest echo. When dawn broke, it crept across the hardwood floor in soft ribbons of golden light, illuminating the small kitchen table where I sat enjoying a cup of just steeped tea. After everything that had transpired, the live stream, the legal battles, the community rising up, I did not expect a sunrise to taste so much like victory. Yet here it was, brushing away shadow and doubt, as tangible as the warmth in my shoulders. I rose and stepped onto the porch. The garden tulips, faithfully planted, lifted their petals to greet me. They were still there, an uprising of color born from soil I had tilled with purpose. Each bud seemed to say, You are not forgotten. My breath caught. I moved slowly to the mailbox. Inside lay a letter, handwritten, the script slightly shaky. Opening it, I found a small note and a pressed wildflower. The note read, Dear Helen, I do not know you, but you remind me that age is not a burden, but a story. Thank you. A stranger's gratitude. It felt sacred. I tucked both note and flower inside the book I carry in my bag. Behind me, at the living room window, the old family home glowed with morning light, a symbol they once thought they owned. Now it stood quiet, no announcements, no new claims. It belonged to the community, to memory, to me, embodied in the words preserved and actions taken. I closed the door lightly and returned indoors. The phone buzzed with notifications. Rather than dismiss them, I read them. A nonprofit had credited our Elder Echo initiative with preventing elder exploitation in over 100 cases, a modest but important milestone. My cheeks warmed with kind satisfaction, not pride but purpose realized. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Agnes, the 87-year-old who had sent that first message of courage. I wrote, Your letter was a seed. Today I hold new stories blossoming because of it. Thank you for reminding me that legacy blooms quietly, one heart at a time. Before sending, I paused to look around the room. The locket lay on the counter, like a memory with edges sharpened by truth. The recorder no longer seemed necessary. My enemies had already buried themselves in their own dishonesty. Their lessons were delivered. I brewed a second cup of tea and poured it into 2 mugs. I walked to the living room and placed one mug near the window, where children's laughter drifted in from the neighborhood. I thought of that little girl with the drawing, the one who looked at me and saw something worthy of admiration. I raised the second mug as if to toast her memory. To all the little ones who will remember the story rather than the horror, who will choose compassion. Then I stepped outside with the mug of tea in hand and watched the day fully arrive. The wind smelled of mulch and possibility. I let the warmth settle into my bones. I did not need to enthrall the world with speeches. I needed only to sit, to sip, and to exist fully in this morning's light, a testament to resilience and quiet justice. My final words for today are not written, but breathed. Held in this exhale, I was forgotten. Now I remain unwavering. If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of a grandmother, a neighbor, or even a version of yourself that was once overlooked, do not let it fade in silence. Because silence is not absence. Silence is where justice begins to grow. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more real tales of women who were underestimated, ignored, even erased until they rose, quietly but powerfully. Because when a grandmother speaks, the world finally listens.